Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive where we're going to explore a topic that's pretty complex but super fascinating: the impact of cannabinoids on reproductive health.
It's going to be a wild ride for sure, but that's what these deep dives are all about, right?
Absolutely. So we're going deep into the science, talking about fertility, hormone
Oh,
regulation.
yeah, we're going all the way down to the molecular level, folks.
That's right. PhD level explanations of cannabinoid signaling pathways, CB1 and CB2 receptors, you name it.
If you're ready to geek out on the science of cannabinoids and how they interact with your body, buckle up.
Okay, so before we get lost in the weeds of signaling cascades and all that, let's set the stage a bit.
Sounds good to me.
So what exactly are cannabinoids, and how did we even discover these things in the first place?
Well, cannabinoids, they're basically this whole class of diverse chemical compounds.
Okay.
And they all have one thing in common. They act on these special receptors in our bodies called cannabinoid receptors.
I see, and I'm guessing one of the most famous cannabinoids is delta-9 THC.
You got it. That's the main psychoactive component in cannabis, the one that gets you high.
Right, the one everyone knows.
And it was actually first isolated and identified back in the 1960s by this brilliant scientist, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam.
Wow, so that's when it all started.
Pretty much, that discovery opened up this whole new world of understanding about how these compounds, these cannabinoids, actually interact with our biology, with our bodies.
So that's THC, but we've been using cannabis for a long time, right? Like way before we even knew about THC or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, cannabis has a long and rich history, both medicinally and recreationally.
For sure.
People have been using it for centuries, probably even millennia. There's evidence dating back thousands of years.
Wow.
But it wasn't until, relatively recently, like the late 20th century, that we discovered this thing called the endocannabinoid system.
Ah, okay, and that was a game changer, right?
Oh, yeah, that discovery totally revolutionized our understanding of how cannabis works in the body.
So tell me, what is the endocannabinoid system? Why is it so important?
So the endocannabinoid system, or ECS for short, it's basically like our body's own internal cannabis system.
That's pretty cool.
It is. It's this intricate network of receptors, enzymes, signaling molecules, all working together.
Wow.
And it's involved in regulating so many crucial functions in our bodies.
Like what?
Oh, you name it: mood, appetite, sleep, pain perception, and get this, even reproductive function.
Really? So it's involved in all that?
Yep, it's a pretty busy system.
It sounds like it. So how does this endocannabinoid system actually work? What are the key players here?
Okay, so the main stars of the show are these molecules called endocannabinoids.
Endocannabinoids.
Yes, yeah. And these are naturally produced by our bodies. They're like the body's own version of cannabinoids.
Okay.
The two main ones you should know are called anandamide and 2-AG.
Got it.
And these little guys, they act like keys fitting into specific receptors in our body, these cannabinoid receptors. And that's how they trigger all these different effects.
Oh, I see. So the endocannabinoids are like keys and the receptors are like the locks.
Exactly. You got it.
So what about these receptors then? You mentioned cannabinoid receptors. Tell me more about them.
All right, so the two main ones we're interested in are called CB1 and CB2.
Okay.
And they're part of this special family of receptors, kind of a VIP club called G protein-coupled receptors, or GPCRs if you want to be fancy.
Fancy, all right. GPCRs. Got it.
And here's the thing. These receptors, they're found all over your body, pretty much everywhere you look.
Really?
Yeah, and that's one reason why cannabinoids can have such diverse effects. They're hitting all these different targets.
Wow, that makes sense. So just to clarify, we've got the cannabinoids. They're like keys. We've got the receptors, the locks, and this whole system is called the endocannabinoid system.
You got it. That's the basic setup.
But how does the actual signaling happen? Like, how does the message get transmitted within the cell once a cannabinoid binds to a receptor?
Now you're asking the real questions. That's where things get super interesting. We're talking molecular signaling pathways.
Ooh, sounds complicated.
It's a bit like a domino effect, one event triggers another and so on, leading to all sorts of changes within the cell.
So it's not just a simple on-off switch. There's a whole intricate dance happening at the molecular level.
Precisely, and that's what we're going to unpack today, because understanding these intricate mechanisms, these signaling pathways, that's the key to understanding how cannabinoids can impact fertility, hormone regulation, all that jazz.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's dive into those signaling pathways.
All right, so buckle up. We're going to be talking about GPCR activation, G proteins, subunit dissociation, signaling pathways like the CAMP-PKA pathway, calcium signaling, and MAPK pathways.
Whoa, that's a lot of jargon, but I'm all ears.
Don't worry, we'll break it all down.
Okay, good. So let's start with the basics. GPCR activation. What exactly happens when a cannabinoid binds to the receptor?
Okay, so picture this. The receptor is like a lock, right? And the cannabinoid is the key.
Okay, got it.
Now, when that cannabinoid key fits into the receptor lock, it causes this little shift, a conformational change in the receptor.
So the receptor changes shape when the cannabinoid binds.
Exactly. It's like the receptor kind of adjusts its posture to accommodate the key.
Interesting.
And that shape shifting, that's what sets everything in motion. It activates this special protein called a G protein, which is hanging out right next to the receptor.
So the G protein is like the next player in line waiting for the signal.
You got it. The G protein is like a messenger relaying the signal from the receptor to other parts of the cell.
Okay, so the G protein gets the message from the receptor. Then what?
Well, these G proteins, the ones hanging out with CB1 and CB2 receptors, they have a special name, Guineos protein.
A catchy name.
Right, and these guys, they interact with these other molecules called GTP and GDP, which basically act like on-off switches for the G protein.
So GDP turns it on, GDP turns it off.
You got it. And when the G protein is activated by GTP, it splits up into these subunits, kind of like a band breaking up.
A band breaking up. Okay, I like the analogy.
So each of these subunits then goes off and interacts with other signaling molecules, kind of like spreading the news, you know?
So the message gets amplified.
Exactly. And that triggers these specific pathways, these signaling cascades, which ultimately determine how the cell is going to respond, how it's going to behave.
Okay, so we're talking about pathways like the CAMP-PKA pathway, calcium signaling, and all those MAPK pathways you mentioned earlier.
You got it. We're going to dive into each of those next time to really understand how this whole intricate dance plays out and how it ultimately affects fertility and hormone regulation.
Wow. I'm already getting a headache just thinking about all these pathways and molecules.
I know, it's a lot to take in, but trust me, it's worth it.
Okay, I'm trusting you on this one. So for now, I guess we'll leave it there and pick up next time with those specific signaling pathways.
Sounds like a plan. We'll break it down step by step, and by the end of it, you'll be a cannabinoid signaling expert.
I hope so. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore the next level of this fascinating world of cannabinoids and reproductive health.
Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, where we left off, we were talking about those complex signaling pathways.
Right, those cascades, all those molecules interacting, and it was a lot to take in.
It is a lot, but it's so crucial for understanding how cannabinoids can actually affect things like, you know, fertility and hormone regulation.
Okay, so let's get into it. I'm ready for some real-world examples.
All right, so there was this study back in 2010 that looked at delta-9 THC and its effects on these cancer cells, specifically cholangiocarcinoma cells.
Cancer cells. But we're talking about reproductive health.
We are, bear with me.
Okay.
So the researchers found that at certain concentrations, delta-9 THC, it actually showed this anti-invasion activity.
Anti-invasion.
Yeah, so basically it prevented those cancer cells from spreading, which is interesting because that whole process of cell invasion, you know, cells moving and spreading, that's super important for all sorts of things, even for like an embryo implanting in the uterus.
Oh, okay. Now I see the connection. So even though it was a cancer study, it hints at how cannabinoids might be influencing processes that are relevant to fertility.
Exactly. It suggests that cannabinoids could be playing a role in modulating, like directing, that cell migration and invasion, which could then affect how an embryo implants, you know.
It's like cellular traffic cops.
Yeah, something like that. It's obviously way more complicated than that, but you get the idea.
I do. It's fascinating. But you did mention that research in this field can be a bit, well, conflicting sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the research is still evolving. We're constantly learning new things.
Right.
So, like, there's another study from 2011. This one looked at cannabis use in patients with inflammatory bowel disease. And what they observed was this potential link between cannabis use and, well, reduced fertility in those patients.
Interesting. So on the one hand, we have a study suggesting potential benefits. And then on the other hand, there's this study suggesting potential downsides.
Yep. That's the thing with research. It's not always black and white.
For sure. So I guess the takeaway is that we need more research to really understand the full picture.
Absolutely. And not just more research, but different types of research. Like we need those controlled clinical trials, you know?
Right. To really pinpoint the effects.
Exactly. Because observational studies, they can show us correlations, but they can't prove cause and effect.
That makes sense. So for someone who's listening to all this, what's the main message they should take away?
I think the key is to remember that research is ongoing and to be cautious,
Not jump to conclusions.
Exactly. And also to remember that everyone's body is different. What works for one person might not work for another.
Right. Individual responses can vary.
For sure. And that's where personalized medicine could come in. As we learn more about the endocannabinoid system and how it varies from person to person, we might be able to tailor treatments more effectively.
So the future of reproductive health could be personalized cannabinoid therapies.
Potentially, it's an exciting field for sure.
It is. And for now, I guess the best advice is to stay informed, talk to your doctor, and be aware of the potential risks and benefits.
Absolutely. Open communication with healthcare providers is key.
Okay, that's good advice. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Receptors, signaling pathways, research findings. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it just shows how complex this whole system is.
It does, and I think it's important for people to understand that complexity to really grasp the potential impact of cannabinoids on their health.
I agree. Knowledge is power, as they say.
All right, so I guess we'll leave it there for now, but there's still more to explore, right?
Oh yeah, we've only just scratched the surface. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll get into some even more specific examples and nuances of how cannabinoids might be influencing different aspects of reproductive health.
Okay, sounds good. Can't wait. And for our listeners, we'll be back soon to continue this deep dive into the fascinating world of cannabinoids and sexual health. All right, so we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into cannabinoids and sexual health.
Yeah, let's get into it. We talked about those receptors, CB1 and CB2, pretty extensively.
Right, those are key players in this whole system.
They are, but, there's still a lot we're figuring out about them, like the actual structure of those receptors, especially CB1.
Really? I thought we had that all figured out.
It's more complicated than it seems. Researchers are still using all these advanced techniques like molecular modeling,
Okay.
trying to create these 3D models of the receptors and see how they change shape when a cannabinoid binds. It's pretty wild.
So it's not just about knowing the receptor exists, it's about understanding its shape and how that shape affects its function.
Exactly. It's all about those subtle shifts, those conformational changes that trigger those downstream effects, those signaling cascades we talked about.
Right, the domino effect.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Like this tiny little molecule binds to a receptor, changes its shape a bit, and that sets off this whole chain reaction that can ultimately affect hormone production, sperm motility, even the ability of an embryo to implant.
It's mind-blowing, really.
It is, and it just shows how much we still have to learn. The endocannabinoid system is so complex, and the more we understand it, the better we can harness its potential, not just for reproductive health, but for all sorts of things.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the research is moving so fast. There are new studies coming out all the time. It's an exciting time to be in this field.
It is. It's amazing to think about all the potential discoveries and therapies that might be out there.
Right. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but I hope our listeners are walking away from this with a sense of wonder,
A sense of wonder about their own bodies and how everything works at this intricate level.
Absolutely, because the more we understand, the more empowered we are to take care of ourselves.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway message you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the main thing is that this endocannabinoid system, it's complex, it's powerful, and it plays a role in so many things, including reproductive health.
Okay.
And we're still figuring it all out, but the research so far tells us that cannabinoids can have both positive and negative effects on fertility and hormone.
Right, it's not a simple story.
Nope, it's not. So it's important to stay informed, to be critical of the information you come across, and most importantly, to talk to your doctor.
Yeah, that open communication with healthcare providers is so important.
It is. It's about making informed decisions about your health, and that starts with knowledge.
Well said. Well, it's been a fascinating journey exploring this world of cannabinoids and sexual health with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And for our listeners, we'll be back soon with another deep dive into some other fascinating corner of science. Until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and take care.